the weekly show with David J. Maloney.
This week, David chats with legendary bassist Matt Bissonette.
And now, here's your host, David J. Maloney.
Welcome, everyone, to the weekly show. I'm your host, David J. Maloney. On tonight's show, we've got a really special guest. He's an accomplished and well-respected bassist whom has played with some of the biggest stars in music, from David Lee Roth to Jeff Lynne to Ringo Starr and Elton John. Matt Bissonette has worked with some of the best in the business. Here to chat about his life, career, and new album with his current band, the Redcoats, is musician Matt Bissonette. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Our featured guest tonight is an accomplished and well-respected bass player and vocalist whom has toured with some of the biggest and brightest stars in music. From David Lee Roth to Jeff Lynne to Ringo Starr and Elton John, Matt Bissonette has worked with some of the best in the business. Here to chat about his life, career, and new album with his current band, the Redcoats, is musician Matt Bissonette. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thank you, David. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
I know music runs in your family. So what was your home like growing up, and what music surrounded you in your home?
Well, we grew up in Detroit, Michigan, and during the 60s was a pretty crazy time, everything going pretty crazy back there at that time. It was, my brother started playing drums when he was about 11, 12, and my mom and dad, they met in Michigan, and they're both musicians. My dad was a drummer, my mom played vibes, and they'd play on gigs together and stuff. So music was always around us, and my sister we'd always be running around, goofing off, with playing Beatles songs around the house and stuff like everybody was at the time. And my mom and dad, Gregg got going fast on the drums, and I was putting up a fight because I wanted to do sports. I didn't really like music as much, kind of the rebel in the house about not doing what everybody else was doing. And I would start going down into our basement and just playing my tennis racket, pretending it was a guitar, and just jamming out with the headphones, to any band, Beatles and even REO Speedwagon, who I'm playing with now, and Kansas and Rush and all these different bands, and just started feeling music a little bit. And then my mom and dad kind of surprised me one day. They're asking me, "Do you ever want to do this?" And I was like, "I don't know. I don't know if I see Gregg doing it, and he's, it's working out great for him." And Gregg would be running around the house at dinner time playing snare drum, his marching band snare drum while we're eating. It's like, so I was putting up a fight about it. But one day my mom said, "Go out and get the groceries out of the trunk." So I went out to pick them up, and there's this guitar in the case, so I'm going, and an amp inside the trunk. And they go, "Here you go." And I'm going, "Well, what's this?" And so you take it downstairs and set it up, and Gregg's ready to play because Gregg was in on it. He's got his drums set up, and we start jamming, and I'm thinking it's a guitar and it's a bass, so I'm going, okay, there's 4 strings, and this isn't like a guitar sound. What is this? And Gregg goes, "Well, look, you're not playing guitar. You're not playing like on Smoke in the Water. You're not going bam, bam, bam. You're the guy that's going dum, 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 dumb guy, dumb guy, dumb guy." And I'm going, "Well, what is that?" I didn't even really know what a bass was. So we sat in the basement and played that song, Smoke on the Water, for about 5 hours. And I kind of got it. I kind of was like, that's what this is, bass is pretty cool. And immediately my dad just started booking me with his band. He would play weddings two days a week. So within 2 weeks of having my bass, he bought me a tuxedo, and he goes, "Do you want to play? Do you want to make $50 a night?" I go, yeah, let's do this." I go, "Dad, I've told the story a million times, and sorry to repeat myself, but he'd go, I go, "Dad, I don't even know what I'm doing. What am I supposed to do?" Because we'd get there and I'd set up his drums and everything, and he'd be having a beer with his accordion player. So it'd be bass, drums, and accordion. I didn't know anything about music. And I go, "Dad, what am I supposed to do?" And he goes, and I'll never forget this, he just goes, "Just listen to Harry, the accordion player. Just watch him and pay attention and listen to him and listen to me and just feed off of what you hear. But the main thing and the most important thing is, when we're on a break, if I point to you, go get me a beer from the bar." And that was my job. It was like, that was Detroit. You just go and you do it and you start working. So he had me working by the time I was probably 13 years old, playing twice a week with my tuxedo, every weekend. So in Detroit, you just get that work ethic and you just start making money. And I was making that money when I was that young, and my friends were all like, "Wow, you're rich." So it just kind of led into other things, playing with the band, the jazz band in school and high school band, and because the need for bass players in Detroit at the time, there wasn't a lot of them. So I got calls for playing in all the jazz bands, and we used to play for the Lions at Pontiac Silverdome with the uh, Brookside Jazz Band and Eddie Santini and all these different bands that were going on, is because of necessity. They didn't really have that many bass players. They were there, but everybody was working. So I kind of carved out a way in Detroit to work for a living and make a living. And then I went to North Texas State following my brother there, and then just kind of just decided. I didn't really know for sure if music was what I wanted to do. In fact, when I got to college, I was in my third year and I was playing legit bass, which I wasn't very good at. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I was kind of going, I don't really want to get a music ed degree because I don't know if I'd be a very good teacher. And I was just starting to get a little bit like, I don't really know what I want to do. And the third year of school, I was going to sign up for PE and try and be like a PE thing and still do music on the side. And then Maynard Ferguson called me to go on the road in my third year. And I've been on the road ever since then. It was just that call, like a lot of people that it happens to, it just changed everything. So I'm sitting here in a hotel room in Omaha, Nebraska, playing with REO because of that day.
Just a weird question. What kind of wedding set list incorporates an accordion?
Well, that's the funny thing is back in Detroit, man, Detroit is a tough town, like most of those towns back there. And at that time, I mean, you're talking 1973, 74, and rock and roll in Detroit is a big deal. Sometimes we'd be playing at a wedding for old people, and we'd always start out with the standard set of like all the jazz tunes, all the things you are, and Left My Heart and Sam Frank's Disco and all that stuff, and play all those tunes, and it usually goes great. But sometimes we would be playing like Hell's Angels weddings and different weddings with a lot of bikers and stuff. And they would just get ticked off because we didn't have a guitar player. So we would play we'd play Smoke on the Water on the accordion. And my dad played great. Right. That's what it was. And he played his accordion on fire. But it sometimes would lead to really crazy things where they just were mad, and they'd get really drunk, and they would start, and there would always be a fight. The bride and the groom, more often than not, they'd get so drunk that by the last fourth set, they'd start a fist fight. And I told people this before, that my dad and I had this situation where my dad would make sure the first thing he'd do is get paid. Was once he got the money, he would be like, okay, this thing goes south. We're going to do the thing where I'm going to hand you the drums and you put them in the car and we're out of here. And my last gig I did with my dad, I remember there was a fight happening, and they were just, all these guys in tuxes, just beards and long hair, just beating the snot out of each other. And and I just remember my dad would go snare drum, and I'd put it in the car, hi-hat, and I would just go back, and we'd look, we got everything ready to go. And he was walking out of the club, and I looked over his shoulder, and there was a lady hanging from a chandelier just punching this guy in the face. And I was like that was the last gig I ever did with my dad. And I was thinking about that yesterday for Father's Day, like what a weird life. But yeah, the tunes for accordion are kind of limited in the rock department.
Oh, speaking of your dad, I heard a story preparing for this interview that seems kind of like a great touchstone for a lot of things that came afterwards. And the story I'm thinking of is a Beatles concert in 1967. Your dad was able to take your brother and Gregg to. Now, before I was born, my parents saw the Beatles at Shea, and I understand it was just insane. Yeah. What is there a moment from the Beatles concert you saw in 1967 that has stuck with you for all these years? Because at some point later in the interview, we're going to have a full circle moment talking about your opportunity, your being able to play with Ringo Starr. Did that kind of trigger anything new or different in you, or was that just a cool thing you got to do with your dad?
Well, I mean, I'm sure everybody you interview is going to start with the Beatles got me into music. It's almost boring to say that now because it's the obvious. We were all absorbed in that. So my dad was playing at a club called the Rooster Tail in Detroit, and this guy and the Beatles I think they were staying there or something on a day off. And he was like going, "What's going on with the Beatles?" And he goes, "Well, do you want tickets for the show?" And he goes, "Yeah, I'd love to get tickets." So he got a couple tickets, and he took Greg and I think it was 1966, I believe, maybe 67. You might be right. But I remember driving in the car, getting out, and just mobs of people at Olympia Stadium in Detroit, and just the mayhem of the whole thing was just overwhelming. It was just all I really remember being that young was looking. I was on the right side and I was looking, and I couldn't hear anything they were playing because it was just so loud and crazy. But I remember cigarette lights, the lights of people's cigarettes, and just smoke and girls screaming. And the only thing I heard the whole night was when Paul sat down and played Yesterday. It got quiet for a
Got
second.
quiet.
And then back to the mayhem crazy. And it was short and sweet and out of there. And we walked out of there just going, not even realizing what we just saw, you know.
It's crazy to me, and perhaps to you too, knowing what you and your brother would go on to do. I mean, imagine seeing the Beatles on stage, Ringo Starr playing drums, and out in the crowd are two young kids who in 20 or 30 years would go on to become some of the, Ringo's future bandmates and players. I mean, what do you think about when you consider that?
Well, I'm just blown away with Greg and I always talk about how blessed we are to be able to play music with our heroes and people that we've never thought we would ever know. And moving into Los Angeles, you get more opportunities to meet these people, your heroes and people. And I was just talking to him the other day about when we were playing with Ringo. When you're around a Beatle, it's kind of weird because you don't want to ever say anything stupid, and everybody's super careful about what they say, but everybody's peppering Ringo with questions about what was it like for this, what was it like for that, and when I got in the band with Ringo and the Roundheads, and we were doing the DVD, a live DVD in Rockford, Illinois, 2002 or something like that. I never really wanted to approach him because I just didn't want to be a dork and just say anything stupid. So we were walking up on stage to play a show one day with Ringo, and behind the speakers we're walking up, and it was like really they were playing Beatle music, and you couldn't really hear it. And Ringo looked at me, and I was like, "Okay, this is my obvious time for my question." And I go, "So when I saw you, and I couldn't, in '66, I couldn't hear anything. How did you ever hear when you're playing? How did you ever hear Paul, or how did you hear John? How did you hear the bass? I mean, I couldn't hear anything." And he looks at me, he goes, "Matt, I didn't hear anything of Paul. All I did was watch his ass." So he said he would just watch them move and play because he couldn't hear anything, you know? And I had an opportunity to do Ringo's song on his record last year, and it was at his house. And usually you're kind of in and out fast, but this time he sat there with me when I was recording the bass. He had already recorded the drums, and he wanted to sit there right next to me, and I'm thinking, okay. And he stayed the whole 45 minutes for the song. And in between takes, he was just talking. It was the first time I've ever we talked for like an hour. And it was almost like he said, "It's okay, Matt. You can ask me these questions that people want to ask." So I would just go, "So when you guys were doing this album and you were playing this," and he talked to me about it. And it was the first time I really picked his brain. And it was almost like he gave me Beatle permission, And it was just, I was just kind of pinching myself going, I'm like talking to him, and he was just a normal guy, and it was pretty cool. So that stuff, Greg and I always talk about how we meet people and we get to play in their bands or do sessions with them, and we're sitting there talking to them when we're two dorky guys from Detroit just growing up playing music, in the basement. It's just amazing. It's amazing the way life works.
Once you got onto the music track, or right before you really kind of went for it, can you think of a particular record you listened to, or maybe that maybe made the light go on in your head and go, "Oh, I didn't know music could be like that," or "I'd love to do that"?
So I remember every Christmas, mom and dad would buy me, I remember the Boston record, the first record, Under the Christmas Tree, opening it up. and seeing an album. And back then you'd open the album up and you'd see all the pictures of the players. You'd know Brad, the singer, or Tom, the guitar player. And every year they would buy us different records all the time. And I think one of the main albums that really changed my life was the first Chicago record when that came out. And I remember the first song, Introduction. And it's kind of like what we did on the Redcoats record, where it's like an introduction to everybody in the band, and this is what we're going to do. And back then you had 10, 12 songs in an album to say everything you want to say. Now music's a lot different because you have one
Chicago's
song.
a big band too. There's a lot of players.
Yeah.
I mean, you got a horn
Yeah.
section, you got, yeah.
Yeah, so in that song Introduction, they start out with this feel, and you hear the rhythm of the band, and then it goes into completely different sections where they get super sensitive and super rocking. Then you have a trombone solo, you have these horn lines. It's just this cacophony of sound that just goes boom, and you feel like you're on this train, and you're going, that's what I like, is bands that take you someplace, from beginning to end, and an album can let you do that. And so I just started listening to so many bands like that. And then when I got a little bit older, I got way into jazz and upright bass and old jazz records and bands like Weather Report. And the greatest thing when we grew up was driving in your car on your AM radio. You'd put it on and everything was on there. You'd have Carole King, you'd have James Taylor, you'd have Rush, you'd have all these bands on the same radio station, where there wasn't like division of sounds, like there is now. Like, this is this station. So you didn't have a choice. It just kind of crashed on you. And what a time to grow up, and Detroit was a great place to grow up because there was 5 miles from my house was Motown, the building where they did all the songs from. And then there's these jazz clubs, and then the rock scene. And then when I went away to college, there's a whole other world, and everything just opens up.
Moving forward a bit, I think one of the seminal moments in your career is when you were brought on to replace Billy Sheehan in David Lee Roth band. What chain of events led to that gig? And did you feel like you were ready when you got that call? Because earlier you had mentioned you weren't sure you were ready about other things. Did you feel you were up to the
I'm
task?
not sure. I'm not sure I'm ready to even change my shorts anymore. I mean, it's just kind of like you wake up and you just go, thank God I'm still here. After I got to college and everything, and I moved to New York for a little bit, then I moved back to LA, just started playing in a lot of different bands and stuff like that. I was playing a lot of top 40 in LA, which was great because I was playing at Disneyland 5 days a week, playing cover 7 nights a week, just absorbed in music and original bands and jazz bands. And I was out on the road with Sheena Easton, playing with her and and I had my own band, A440, and we were opening up for Aha and just different bands. And I remember Gregg got the gig with Dave, and he was doing great. And I remember writing songs, and sometimes Gregg would play them for Dave. They did one of the songs, Knuckle Bones, on one of the records. So Dave kind of knew who I was. And I guess stuff was going on with Billy and Dave and the band, or whatever was happening. Still don't really know to this day. It was kind of a thing going on, and they just kind of called me and just said, "Can you come out and do this tour, and be in the band?" And then Billy left, and then I just remember showing up for doing the Just Like Paradise video, just kind of going, "Wow." It was like we were talking about earlier. It's like, when things happen, you can't just go, well, it's going to go like this. It's going to take this time. And like life just happens. Like John Lennon said, that life is what happens when you're busy making plans, right?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that what Lennon said? So it just kind of got thrust on me. And I didn't even have time to really react to go, yeah, I want to do this, or yeah, it would be good. Because at that time I was younger and, a little bit lost about what I wanted to do. So it just kind of happened. And I was grateful for it. I kind of realized about a year in that it really wasn't where my heart was. And I loved Dave and the band, and it was being with my brother and Steve Vai and Tuggle and all the guys. It was an amazing thing. But I was kind of going halfway through going, well, I'm not really a metal guy. And, not that you had to be a metal guy to play with Dave, but I was kind of a little bit in a different place in my mind. I didn't really know, like even now, at 63, I know exactly what I don't want to do. The problem is what exactly I want to do. You know, what is it exactly? So I was kind of just half in, half out. So I was there for about 3 years. We toured, we played, and it was amazing. And it was an amazing situation. And it led to a lot of other things. But after about halfway through, I was kind of realizing, okay, I'm probably not going to be here super long, you know? And then I left in like 91, and it was an amazing experience. I mean, it's one of those things that you just kind of, it's like when I got the gig with Elton, all of a sudden you're going from a bus tour to a private plane, and everybody's kissing your butt because they think you're so much better because you're doing this gig, when in reality, the smokescreen is nothing's changed. It's just for this amount of time you're playing with a band that's a little higher up the chain. You know, it's all the same thing, you know? So it was kind of a weird time because it just happened real fast, you know?
Looking back, is there a moment from those years playing with David Lee Roth and touring and recording that has kind of stuck with you all these years?
Well, there's a lot of things. I mean, Dave taught me a lot about entertaining a crowd. And I mean, there was a couple stories. When I was out with Maynard, I remember one time we played at Cincinnati Riverfront Stadium one time, and there was like 30,000 people there watching this jazz festival, and we were playing. And we got a taste of the highs of that. And we get in the bus, and we're driving 8 hours to some city in Colorado, and the gig's almost snowed out. And there's nobody could get to the gig. There's probably 20, 30 people there. And we're thinking, we're going to cancel, you know, but we go, no, we're going to play the show. And Maynard saw us backstage kind of a little bit rock starred out from the night before, kind of going like, oh man, why are we even playing? And he took us in the back and said, all right, you guys, I know what you're thinking, because he's been through this thing his whole life. He goes, I want to go out tonight and give the best show we've ever given to these 30 people. And we went out there and we killed it. And it was an amazing night. Probably played better. Everybody probably played better than they ever did. And we all went back to, on the bus going, okay, lesson learned. That's the way Dave is, man. Dave is just like every night, boom, just give it everything. And he puts his life on the line, hanging from things and going out on the, you know, and you see that and you go, and the same thing with Elton, you know, when Elton does it every night, he goes out there and just gives it everything. And you go, well, if he's doing it, I got to do it, you know, and I'm, you know, you just watch that and you're around that, you know, and Dave's very physical and he's whipping things around. I mean, I would have to watch out for, you know, flying objects from him because he's whipping these crazy things around. And I remember my first gig I had with Dave, because I was kind of going, it's really hard to take Billy Sheehan's place because he's like the godfather of the bass, you know, and he's a good friend and I love the guy. And I'm going, it just feels weird taking his place under whatever circumstance it was. So I was going, okay, here we go. Doing the first gig. And I remember the first song, the lights come down and I'm kind of feeling this anxiety in my stomach. I'm going, okay, here we go. How's the crowd going to react to this? And we play the first song and we're rocking out like this. And I look out in the crowd and I see this nunchuck, this Chinese nunchuck flying right at my head. And it goes, boom, and it gets right into my bass strap. It hits right here and it's dug in. Like, I mean, the thing would have killed me. It was like going like this, wobbling like this. And I took it out, put it on the ground, and I go, God, please let that never happen again. And it never happened again. But I'm just thinking, these things happen, you know, it's life, you know, but I'll never forget that nunchuck. And I mean, I just always have respected Dave for his go-gettedness and his professionalism and wanting to make everybody happy. It's like Garth Brooks doing a sound check and going way to the top, going, what does it sound like in that seat? You know, for some guy that's, you know, paid half price for his ticket because he can't afford it. It's being able to care about everybody that's hearing you.
That's our show for tonight. Thank you so much for watching. And a special thanks to Matt Bissonette for joining us. Matt will be back again next week for part 2 of our interview. So please tune back in. Stay safe, everyone.